In this chapter, we're going to be going over Chapter 10, Organizational Change and Innovation. The whole idea behind this is to give you some ideas as far as how to manage some of the change that you may be dealing with, also what to expect when change is coming into play. Today, there's all kinds of changes going on in the business world. You're getting more and more niche products coming out there, much more batches of one, things that are really targeted to smaller groups of people. You have a lot more disruptive innovation because of the technology for today. There's a lot more offshore suppliers being used. More and more things are being made in China and Taiwan and India, other places where it's much more cheap to produce the products that you have. You can have reactive or proactive change. Reactive change is where you are reacting to a particular instance or something that happened in society or in your business or something along those lines. For example, Dick's Sporting Goods. After a series of shootings at schools, Dick's Sporting Goods decided they were no longer going to carry long guns. Proactive change is something where you're saying, okay, we are going to deliberately make a particular change or innovation in something. For example, the Apple iPhone or the iPad. When the iPad came out, who knew that everybody needed to have a tablet of some sort? There's all kinds of forces for change that are going on today. You have both inside and outside forces. Outside forces are going to be based on demographics. In other words, what kind of ages are happening as far as society is concerned? Right now, society is aging, and you have more and more of the baby boomers who are retiring. So there's going to be some changes in products, services, processes because of that. You have a lot of technological advancements. The computerization of things is just blossoming. You have more market changes, things like customer preferences, and a whole lot more social and political changes that are happening. Inside forces may be what's happening with your workforce. In other words, you're getting a lot of job dissatisfaction. Maybe there's a lot of conflict that goes along with the organization between managers and employees, and things like that. So there's a lot of forces that are really forcing organizations to make changes today. Now, you basically have three types of changes: adaptive, innovative, and radically innovative. Adaptive change is more along the lines of we just have to make a tweak here and there. For example, you have an accounting firm, and it's coming up on March. They're going to be spending the next couple of months really working on taxes, so there's going to be a lot of overtime. You have innovative change. So, for example, a grocery store decides to go to more 24-hour service. And then you have radically innovative change. For example, Amazon doing delivery of products via drones. Kurt Lewin came up with this idea of his change model. What he was talking about here was unfreezing, changing or intervention, and then refreezing. In other words, you have to make sure that people understand what's the reason behind the need for the change. Get people motivated as far as, all right, so here's a change that needs to be made. We find it very, very important. Let's make the changes. Then you have some sort of intervention. In other words, what are you doing as far as training? What are you doing as far as documenting the new processes? Then you have the refreezing. In other words, providing the support and holding people accountable for the new behaviors that are going to be necessary for that change, and not letting things go back to the way they were. One of the tools that a lot of organizations use for major changes is what's called OD, organizational development. OD is not just doing anything for some sort of a change. It is based on research, looking at diagnosing what's actually going on, and deliberately making some changes in people's behavior. The change agent is someone who actually has the background in the behavioral sciences and in psychology and some of these other things that can help with that change. Now, this is something that I have done for quite a number of years, is a lot of OD interventions to help organizations get to where it is that they need to go. Now, you can use OD for things like conflict within the organization. Maybe you have an organization that's becoming more staid, and you need to open up some of the communications or something along those lines. And then you also have a lot of mergers and acquisitions that have been going on, and OD intervention experts helping to pull those two organizations together. It's almost like a marriage. With a marriage, you have two people who've been living two separate lives, and all of a sudden they're together trying to make one family. It's the same thing with two organizations going through a merger. They have been very totally different, and now you're trying to put these two together into one. The way OD works is very much like Kurt Lewin's change model. With OD, you have some sort of a diagnosis. You're trying to figure out what is the underlying issue that needs to be resolved. You do your intervention, and then you evaluate what happened. You have your feedback that comes back. Okay, so what's the next step that goes along with it? If you notice, it looks a lot like the change model, where you have the unfreezing, you have the intervention or the change, and then you have the refreezing aspect. If OD is very, very effective if it's done right. One of the things to think about is multiple types of interventions. You can't just do just a one shot and have it completely done and think there's going to be all kinds of changes. It needs to be something that is multiple and consistent. You have to have management support in order for any kind of major changes, particularly through OD, happen. You have to be looking at not just what are we going to be doing tomorrow, also what are we going to be doing 5 years from now. And so there's a lot of things that are important as far as the effectiveness of OD. I'll give you some examples. I was working with one manufacturing organization, the human resources of this one large organization. They wanted what they called a seat at the table. They had been seen in the past as just personnel. In other words, what they did was they just made sure that people got oriented, they handled any pay problems, things like that. This HR group wanted a seat at the table. They wanted to be much more strategic. They wanted to be involved in the direction of the total organization. I put together a process where they started to identify all the things that they do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And what they were doing is putting them on Post-it notes. So they identified, okay, so here are the things that I do, here are the things that I do, and put those down. Then they had to judge those things on a 1 to 5 scale, how well they did the things, how often they did them, and what kind of impact did those things have. And so they just covered the wall, all right? What I did was I took all of those and I started to analyze all of the things that were on those Post-it notes. And I realized that there were some major tasks that were primarily transactional. Things like payroll, things like offer letters, things like communication distribution. And then there were things that were much more transformational. In other words, they made a huge difference as far as the organization. They were much more strategic. They were much more forward-looking. And so what I did was I put together those key transactional activities, and I numbered them, and the key transformational activities, put those with letters. Then what I did was I ran averages as far as how well, how often, and the impact as far as what all those things had. And I plotted them. And what you see here is that plot. Here are the transactional activities. Here are the transformational activities. You can see the impact. The black line, the impact of the transactional activities was relatively low. The impact on the transformational was high. However, look at how well they did them. They do the transactional activities great. When it comes to the transformational, they don't do them nearly as well, which basically helped to point out for them they needed to make some changes as far as the way human resources was actually doing business. They've realized that they had to do a heck of a lot more training as far as the more transformational types of things for their own people. And they needed to free up the time by getting rid of all the transactional. And so what they did was they made changes as far as their organization. The transactional, they actually started to outsource. They started to outsource payroll and some of the other things that went along with that so that they could focus much more on the things that had more of an impact, the transformational types of things. That is an example of organizational development. Here's another one. I was working with a small company, small pharmaceutical firm, where they were having some real issues as far as morale, and they were about to go belly up. And so what I did was they asked me to come in, and we did kind of a listening session where we stepped back and we said, all right, we put together a set of 10 questions, a semi-structured survey, and talked to every single person in the organization. And with what I did was I took all that data, analyzed that data, fed that back to the senior management. Things like questions like, how would you rate your confidence in the business to stay open over the next 1 to 2 years? And you can see what the executive said, what the manager said, and what the employees said. And when you're looking at the open-ended comments, most of the comments were fairly positive. Some were negative. All right. When you start looking at the question around 3 to 5 years out, you can see that the confidence went down quite a bit. More of the conversations, more of the concepts were negative than positive. And the primary areas were around funding and the products that they had. They also had some issues as far as clarity of direction. In other words, managers and individual contributors weren't real clear as far as what the direction was going forward. You can see a majority of the open-ended questions or answers were negative. And so I took all of this, I fed this back to the senior managers, and I had several suggestions as far as what they needed to do going forward. One of them was some changes in the executive team. 2 years later, they asked me to come back and do the same thing. And so what we did was this survey with the same questions again, along with a couple of other added ones. And it was like 180 degrees. They had taken the suggestions that I had, they put those into place, and over 2 years, they really worked as far as their funding and also their morale. And you saw a real change as far as some of the things that were happening there. Again, organizational development. In other words, multiple types of interventions, doing some of the things that would be necessary for the future. When you start thinking about innovation, you have product and process innovation. All right, products are the things that you sell, process are the things that you do. You can have incremental or you can have completely new direction types of innovation. Incremental is not going to give you as much of a bang for your buck. Small amounts. New direction, much riskier. And the thing is, it can give you a heck of a lot bigger bang for your buck. When you start thinking about the type of innovation, product and process, and then their focus, are you talking about improvement or new directions? Examples of improvement, product improvement, would be the various iterations of the iPhone. So for example, right now we have the iPhone 11 out. Not much of a change from the iPhone 10, okay, or the 8 before that. And so it was primarily kind of improvement types of things. Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, started using 3D printing some time ago. The thing is, they're making some improvements, some incremental improvements as far as creating the products. When you start product completely new directions, think about driverless cars, things like this. So you have a couple of different approaches as far as innovation is concerned. In order to truly have an innovative organization, you have to have an innovation system. In other words, first of all, committed leadership who have a particular strategy that really helps with that innovation. They have to create that culture where innovation and change is required and the structure and processes that go along with it so that you can also have the right resources and people in order to make all of this happen. So it really is more of a system. You make a change to any one of these, it's going to impact the entire system. The thing is, people are going to resist. All right. Anytime there's some sort of a change, people are going to resist. As I usually tell folks, the only person who likes change is a wet baby. And so there's always going to be some sort of resistance to change. And there's a lot of reasons for it. In the book, it talks about the 10 reasons Things like, a climate of mistrust, surprise and fear of the unknown, peer pressure, all of these things. Based on research, the primary reason why people resist is what's called parochial self-interest. In other words, they're afraid of losing something that's really important to them. Things like power, money, prestige, convenience, security, maybe competence. So, for example, let's say that you're an expert in in a system that you've been using for a number of years. Everybody comes to you if they need help on the system. All of a sudden, the powers that be are going to put in a brand new system. You might resist because now what's threatened is your professional competence. You're not going to be the expert anymore. People aren't going to be coming to you anymore. There goes some of your power. And so there's the primary reason why people resist is because they're afraid of losing something that really is important to them. Next time you have any kind of a change, step back and think, what is it that people are afraid of losing? The next major reason is lack of understanding and trust. They don't understand the reason why the change is necessary, or they don't trust the change agent. If you don't have much trust or you don't have a good relationship with your boss is coming in and trying to make some changes, you're going to resist. You also have what's called differing assessments. Two people can look at the same thing. One say it's good, another say it's bad. It just happens. The last reason is that whole idea of low tolerance for change. So these are some of the key points from the chapter. If you have questions, please give me a shout.